On behalf of the India International Center and Jan Prasar, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this special webinar and discussion on state of the Indian media. News or noise, watchdog or lapdog. This discussion marks the 30th anniversary of the presidential assent to Prasar Bharati Act 1990. This is the 27th discussion, which we have been holding since 1994 to commemorate the occasion. But we shall not be discussing or talking about Prasar Bharati or All India Radio or Doordarshan today, because they are now seen in the genre of pretenders rather than public service broadcasters. So today's discussion is on a very broad canvas, and we are discussing state of the Indian media, taking up both print media and broadcasting media. We have a very distinguished panel here today. N. Ram joins us from Chennai. Ram is the former editor-in-chief of the Hindu. We have Jawhar from Kolkata. Jawhar is the former CEO of Prasar Bharati. And we have Pamela Philipose, senior journalist and author of Media Shifting Terrain from New Delhi. Yours truly, Suhas Borker, convener of Jan Prasar, shall moderate the discussion. Each panelist shall speak for 10 minutes, and then we shall go into the Q&A session for the next 20 minutes. This shall be followed by a concluding time of remarks of 2 minutes each by the panelists. Before we begin, I have to make an obituary reference. This obituary notice appeared in the classified columns of the Hindu yesterday, 11th of September. With profound regret, we announce the demise of Miss Media, beloved daughter of freedom and wife of truth in New Delhi on 8th September 2020, mourned by friends and family. Reports say that this advertisement was placed by a young Delhiite, Kartik Sahni. This takes us back 45 years ago when a classified advertisement appeared in the Times of India on 27 June 1975, the day after Indira Gandhi had enforced emergency. Can we have the next slide up, please? Democracy, beloved husband of truth, loving father of liberty, brother of faith, hope and justice, expired on 26 June. This had been placed by a young 26-year-old journalist, Ashok Mahadevan, in Bombay. We call it Mumbai now. But why this strong public perception today in India that there is an undeclared emergency and that the media is under siege? Is Indian media being manipulated by the government through its patronage relationships? Has censorship and managing the headlines given way to something more insidious? Has corporatization and the concentration of media ownership impinged on democratic practices, values, norms, and social and political institutions? Are fake news and troll factories and assembled lines of Goebbelsian tweets and violent threats subverting the democratic process? Is media being polarized against itself? Take a look at what is happening. There is a concentrated diversion from the real issues in the media. The suicide of the actor Sushant Singh Rajput takes center stage, and the role of Riha Chakraborty plays out day in and day out. TV studios have become courts, anchors have become judges, primetime debates are hearings. A particular TV studio led by a misogynist is setting new standards for courts of a banana republic. Real issues are ignored: mishandling of COVID-19 pandemic, status and welfare of migrant workers. The economy is down, impacting the GDP by minus 23.9%. There are devastating floods all across the country, massive unemployment, paralysis of the MSME sector, the sale of family silver in terms of national assets to crony capitalists. A false narrative is let loose. Information is suppressed. Anyways, the Prime Minister gives no interviews. No one can ask any questions. Dissent and criticism are curbed. Now there is no question hour even in Parliament. Federalism is under severe attack. The GST impasse threatens India's federal structure. Judiciary is being subverted. The Ramayana is telecast during lockdown. Facebook is manipulated. One can go on and on. Our fragile democracy is under threat. And where is the Indian media, the fourth pillar? I ask. Can I now request Ram to take the floor and open the discussion?
Thank you, Suhas. This is a very important subject, and I'm glad you framed it. There was a time when I believed and proclaimed in various fora that when it came to freedom of speech and expression, and by extension, the freedom, independence, and general state of the press, India was in an enviable position, certainly in relation to every other developing country. But that was 40 years ago, when the socio-political environment, and as a prominent part of it, the news media environment, seemed more open, more capacious, and more welcoming than it had been at any time anyone could recall in post-independent India. The polity seemed to be unusually open to a choice of directions and paths it might take. And daily newspapers and magazines in English as well as various Indian languages, liberated from their enslavement and inglorious role during the emergency of 1975-77, seemed eager and energized to take full advantage of the new opportunities that had opened up, especially for the Indian language newspapers. And especially for those newspapers, there were opportunities for accelerated and expansive growth, relatively unfettered functioning, and unaccustomed commercial success, a phenomenon described by my friend, the political scientist Robin Jeffrey, as India's newspaper revolution. And even more importantly, for significant sections of the press, there were opportunities for playing a more meaningful, energetic, and effective role for the striving of a democratic, progressive, and just society. If I were to claim anything like that today, I would be vulnerable to the charge of purveying fake news, which brings us to the present state of the media, or the news media in India, already weakened by the digital disruption, the business model under tremendous pressure, and that pressure has been intensifying, and assaults on that business model as well. You can see it in the case of those who stand up. Then you have the impact of the pandemic, making it even more vulnerable. And today, to speak about the independence of the news media would be, I think, largely a myth. There are, hearteningly, some sections, relatively small in relation to the big players, that stand up. And there's some very interesting investigative, analytical, and intelligent journalism available in these publications, and also I think in some of the main dailies, in some editorial pages and news pages. So we don't want to underestimate that. But today, noise, those I think words are well chosen in the title you've given this. News or noise, I think noise predominates, particularly on news television. And here I just want to cite an article by Nidhi Rasdan of NDTV, who's now with associate professor at Harvard, called The Shameful Vilification of Riya Chakrabarti, where she basically says that, people can recall the way a TV journalist walked in with allegedly a bag of documents into a live TV show, and they made much of it. And you know what those documents were, or those papers were, the photographs were, showing body parts and so on. The story of Sushant Singh Rajput, she comments, Nidhi, has been the lowest of the low for most Indian news channels. And that's saying a lot, she says, in an industry that has set a very low bar for itself in the first place. I think this has happened also to the press, to the newspapers, to a large extent, although the noise is not obviously, it's not at the level you see on most television news channels. There are good exceptions to this, and I would like to single out NDTV, which has, in this difficult situation, in this grim situation, stood up and continues despite the huge assault by the state, by the government in power, using the CBI, the Enforcement Directorate, and the Income Tax Department to virtually try to kill. But they have fought a good fight, and I think a lot of us are with those who stand up. And that, I think, is important. And there are other voices also in the press, people who are here. Jawhar Sircar himself, I think he's been writing, and when somebody like that with vast experience, also former Culture Secretary of the Government of India, speaks on issues relating to bureaucracy, how institutions are being seized or captured from within, I think that enhances these voices in journalism. And the other panelist, Pamela, also, I think, has looked at it quite deeply. So there are people like that. Suhas himself is a fine example. But Watchdog, or it's almost a rhetorical question, Watchdog or Lapdog. I read this article in the New York Times. I think it's largely accurate. Under Modi, India's press is not so free anymore. That we knew before, but I think they sort of tried to substantiate it. This was published on April 2nd and updated thereafter. And they quote Rajdeep Sardesai as saying that a large section of the media has become a lapdog and not a watchdog. The watchdog function itself is arguable, whether at any stage we were always watchdogs, but I think there's been some good investigative stuff in the press, in the media. And although that continues, that tradition, it's overwhelmed by the noise and the propaganda role, with which we are very, very familiar on behalf of the government. And much has been written on the methods used, talking to proprietors, asking them to do inspiring and hopeful journalism, talking to advertisers and discouraging them or virtually forcing them not to advertise in certain publications. I myself, after the Rafale series was published, the ad stopped from the central government, but we carried on. And there are other such cases. Some have caved in, a lot have caved in, those who try to stand up. Some have tried in their own ways to counteract it, but as I said, the dominant feature today is that a large section of the media has turned lapdog rather than watchdog. If watchdog was ever an accurate description of the role that we play. What is to be done? I think that perhaps will come up later in the discussion after you hear the other discussants. Their views will be taken into account, and I hope that we'll be able to come up with some ideas, some hopeful ideas of what can be done. I have an example from Tamil Nadu, where there has been a major pushback by people who are journalists working in TV channels, the Tamil language journalists. One of them was pushed out through a social media campaign and also other kinds of pressures right from the top in Delhi. And he's joined another an editor-in-chief, in fact. I can provide the details if there is interest. But Tamil Nadu is a case where I think there's a lot of hope. There was a vicious offensive from the extreme right, and there was a pushback, a resistance, also on the social media and on the channels themselves. And I think so far the battle is well met, and I would even claim that we are well able to resist them. But and there may be other stories of that kind which should come up in the discussion. Thank you, Suhas. Have I taken up my 10 minutes? I don't know.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Ram, for that overview. And now can I request Jawhar Sircar to come in, please?
Hello. Thank you all for inviting me to this discussion, though I'm not a professional journalist. Now, the two key issues are, I think, news and noise and the question of being a watchdog or a lapdog. Now, it's hardly worth discussing with anyone. So we all know which way it's going. And I can assure you that these years will not be forgotten. As a student of history, I know that these terrible years will not be forgotten, which means in a way that those who are now conspiring, collaborating, will also not be forgotten. Now, people say that don't exaggerate. Don't exaggerate. Why should 5 or 6 years matter? I said, then why do you read Sher Shah? Sher Shah was in power for only 5 years. And he occupies the whole chapter. So, I mean, let's not belittle history. The reason why it's happening is more important to us. Just a word about Prasar Bharati. Like that obituary notice, we could have one for Prasar Bharati. There were some good chaps who tried, and there were lousy ones. But then it was completely converted after 2014. It was pretty well during Atal Bihari Vajpayee's regime because he was more tolerant. Now, having said that, why I'm saying Prasar Bharati is not worth discussing, though I know that Jan Prasar is intrinsically connected to Prasar Bharati's the public broadcaster being fair and neutral, is that it's converted its name rather surreptitiously to Prachar Bharati right now, but then it has a lot of competition. It has a lot of competition from Sudarshan TV, from Republic TV, from lots of other channels who go more overboard. Now, having said that, let's move on to why it's happening. Now, apart from the compulsion that Ram mentioned about ED and CBI, having worked for the government, I know how subtly and not so subtly government uses its hegemonic powers. Even liberal governments have used them. But then the absolute precision with which the torpedoes are being fired and the attacks are being launched, and the mercilessness with which the executive powers are used leads completely new dimensions to the story of the Indian Republic. I mean the Indian Republic, not the other one. The compulsions are there. There are compulsions on editors, on advertisers and others, and everyone knows about it. We can't document it, but we know about it. But then we cannot also deny that there's an audience for it. There is an audience. That large numbers who voted, hopefully truthfully without the EVM playing foul, the large numbers that have voted somebody for the second time indicates that there is support for this sort of mentality, this sort of articulation. There is support, and we can't deny it. So to some extent, this is happening because the channels, the newspapers and others are also playing to the gallery. It's a different matter altogether that this stems from irrationalism, and irrationalism stems from an excess of the liberal, rational attitude to life. And what causes these malaise to come up, there's a different matter. The fact is that we have a large audience waiting for the Riya Chakrabarti, the Sushant Singh Rajput type of news. In fact, it's going so bad that one of these days, Arnab or somebody will say, oh, so Sushant took drugs, so let's get him arrested as well. Oh, sorry, we are discussing him, we are defending him. It's all getting around in circles. But the point is that there is a large audience who want to lap up, And this we cannot this is what I call the Coliseum style of politics. First, you put in the gladiators, they fight each other, and somebody puts a thumbs up and thumbs down. Then you put gladiators versus lions. Then you put lions versus human beings who are to be eaten. And it goes on endlessly unless somebody interjects. Yesterday, a court, I think the Bombay High Court, asked, don't you have regulations? Now, I have served also as Information and Broadcasting Secretary, again, for no fault of mine. And I know that there are instruments available with government which are not being used. The permission to Sudarshan TV to go in for that terrible insult to the minority community is an indication. And after that, I believe the High Court has also come in. Now, so the question is that there is a market for the irrational, for the sensational. Otherwise, how do you think World Wrestling Federation and the boxing matches and everything goes on? It goes on because people love to see other people getting slaughtered. But the point is, society in the form of state organs need to bring in a certain amount of regulation. Otherwise, it is open obscenity. It is open obscenity. That has to be regulated. There is a genetic propulsion, there is a genetic urge within the press and the judiciary that I have seen for 45 years, 42 years in service, to question the executive. And I assure you, having been on the other side, it has acted as a check on the executive, or that part of the executive that is hegemonic by nature. Now, that genetic urge is being suppressed. And therefore, the rage circus that is going on is also the escape through a safety valve. The noise is getting TRP. The lapdog is more popular. So we have come to a pass where there's a bend in the trend of the Indian media. There are online media. There are, I know, at least 5 channels that are fighting it out. Then we have the mainstream media like Ram's Hindu, the Telegraph, Anand Bazar. But of course, they have another side also on the AVP. So there are, and NDTV, who are fighting it out. So why I started with history and why I'll end with history is that history is watching us. History is watching us. There was a movie called What Did You Do in the War, Daddy? History is watching us, and history will watch us. Who were the ones who capitulated to the forces of darkness and who stood up? I already have 2 criminal cases filed in some odd place where I'm spending a lot of money. But that sort of pressure will always be there. So my summation is that this noise and this lapdog tendencies are emanating from a particular reservoir. And we need to go back to that reservoir to understand why it's all happening. And all of it is not compulsion. That is my last statement. There's a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of gains that people get. And we need to get deeper into it. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jawhar, for that insightful, from both sides of the fence. I mean, you've been...
Yes, I'm on both sides of the barricade.
Both sides of the barricade. Okay.
Both sides of the barricade.
Can I now request Pamela to come on, please? Pamela has done a seminal work, recently, and you must all read it. Media shifting terrain. Yeah, go ahead, Pamela.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan Prasar, and thank you, IIC, for inviting me to speak. The presidential assent to the Prasar Bharati Act was a moment of hope that India would finally get itself a national autonomous broadcaster. But we know that was quickly belied. And today, the failure of the Prasar Bharati experiment thanks to the larger failure of the Indian media, it points to that. It points to the larger failure of the Indian media to perform its mandated role of watching over democracy. There are, of course, as my speakers before me have highlighted, honorable exceptions. And there are also occasions when those who have, by and large, given up the fight unexpectedly assert their independence. But exceptions apart, few would disagree that assertion of media independence as an area has shrunk painfully and conspicuously in recent times. But before we turn the light and heat on the media, let us first understand the external environment. The rise of the authoritarian state in India has been recognized as a reality, and its toolkit of practices to control and co-opt the media has proved its efficacy over the years. These practices, with the intent to tame the media, include attractive offers of support, and Ram just talked about it a while ago. Control is exercised through a combination of patronage and punishment, and through a range of steps, ranging from the administrative to the economic to the legal. In May, when the government of India approached the Supreme Court to ensure that the media houses are stopped from reporting on COVID-19 without the government's permission, it was an instance of how legal pressures were brought to bear on the functioning of the media. The idea is to exploit the existing vulnerabilities of individual media houses, even as new ones are created for them. A noted anchor of a TV organization, ABP, on having no way but to leave it after his show was constantly censored, went public on the ways the government put pressure on his organization, which in turn forced management to put pressure on him. He revealed that the monitoring teams of the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting actually scrutinized the content put out, and also the content that the government needed put out. So they were required to carry this content, and they were required to censor themselves if they didn't carry, if they carried stuff that the government didn't want to hear. Such surveillance strategies are deployed to make it extremely difficult for media actors to protect themselves. Hardly anyone watching television or reading a newspaper is even aware of these realities, and the diminishing trust that people have in media institutions get deeper as a result. Now that we have got a small glimpse of the material reasons for why the media prefers to suspend its watchdog function and take on the far less stressful role of the lapdog, let us quickly explore the ways in which the media has acted as the servitor of the state in recent times. First, it is required to amplify the narratives. It should not surprise us, therefore, that among the first groups contacted through video conferencing by the government before its lockdown strategy was revealed were friendly television journalists and media owners. The first, on March 23rd, was with the key stakeholders from the electronic media, as reported by the Prime Minister's own website, which spoke of the need to ensure that people don't let their guard down and become careless. But also we need to counter pessimism and panic through positive communication. So positive communication was the slogan of the day. The next day, hours before his lockdown address, he spoke to a selection of owners and editors of print media, reiterating the earlier messages while observing that it was important to tackle the spread of pessimism, negativity, and rumor. Citizens need to be assured that the government is committed to countering the impact of COVID-19. Many publicly vouched that they would do this, do everything in their power to ensure that the government's voice reaches the people. there seems nothing amiss about this. After all, the country was facing a major crisis, and the government of the day has the right to expect the media to help it in this moment of crisis. But what is disturbing is that when failures surface, the media does not speak up. Why is this the case? And that's the question we have to ask ourselves. The ideologies driving the state come to bear on media reporting. The systematic and hateful targeting of the members of the Tablighi Jamaat, a Sunni Muslim organization, which happened to be holding a mass meeting in early March, marked a new low in the communalization of the COVID-19 pandemic. The media deemed them super spreaders using the language of the troll. It needed the wisdom of the Bombay High Court to see through the charade. Delivering a verdict against 29 foreign Jamaatis on August 22, it observed that the case had the smell of malice and that the Jamaat members were made scapegoats by a political government. The corollary to this is, of course, the unspoken demand made on the media to attack any political party or institution that is critical of the government. Important observations made by opposition parties are ridiculed, critiqued, and discarded. We are, in a sense, not allowing the understanding of a very complex reality to come about. It is when political power has to be gained or safeguarded that these attempts at media capture get most pronounced. We saw this during general election 2019, and we are seeing it yet again as the Bihar polls comes closer. One of the reasons for the unremitting and inexplicable coverage, 3-month-long almost, television focus on the Sushant Singh Rajput case was undoubtedly driven by the Bihar elections. And recent election posters bearing his face would be evidence of this. How are these anomalies to be corrected? How do we regain sanity in our public discourse? Can lapdogs be trained to become watchdogs? These are questions that civil society will have to take more seriously if they value an independent media. The UK recently had citizens agitating against media houses for biased coverage. There was a time in India too when there was widespread and a very public demand for an independent media, and the struggle for the Prasar Bharati legislation was evidence of that. We talked about, Jawhar talked about, why do we have something like Sudarshan News that is so clearly attacking the minorities in this country? Why is it being allowed to spread its poison? Ram talked about how the Indian media has a traditional legacy. There was Bofors, there was Rafael, there were many investigations that we need to own up to. And why is it that the public that stands to benefit the most from an argumentative and investigative media, why is it not speaking up? I think that's a question that I would like to end my small presentation today with, because unless civil society, unless the ordinary person comes out and says, no, we don't want the bilge that passes off as a prime time news television. We don't want a toxic hate speech. Only then will we have some sense. Only then can we ensure that the little lapdog that is now comfortably sitting in the lap of the government turns to be a little bit of a watchdog. I don't expect much from it, but a little bit of a watchdog. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pam. I think the moot question is, how can we convert the lapdog to watchdog? What could you ask? In fact, there's a word coined in Hindi now, Godi media, the media which sits in the Godi of the government.
Suhas,
yes.
on that question, I'm a bit of an expert on dogs, I would claim. These traits are bred into dogs, and don't have any illusion that lapdog can be converted into a watchdog. Unfortunately.
So, can we now open the floor to questions? We have a couple of them coming in. There is one from Mahvish Rehma. He's given his location as Jharkhand, and he says he asked, "Is there a need for empowered regulators?" Obviously, there is, and stricter punitive provisions, since statutory regulators like Press Council, which is a truthless body, an electronic media monitoring center. Now, Jawhar would hold me out, that's just a monitoring center. It has no powers, lack adequate powers. But anyway, the point is, do we have the need for empowered regulators and stricter punitive provisions? For instance, that Sudarshan TV. There's no play. It is, in fact, it should not be there at all. But it still survives with government help. Would you like to take that, John?
You see, this interesting point that you raised about EMMC. EMMC is almost an undercover agency. It has monitors monitoring all that's important in television and keeping records. The purpose is very innocent in the sense that if somebody makes a complaint, and one can always go back to those tapes. But then it was during my time that I found a different mentality sort of creeping in, new people coming in, many of them from a background of an ideology coming in and setting up this, utilizing the EMMC as an arm of state power. That was not the intention. The EMMC or a watchdog body that keeps records of the important TV channels is required. But that has to be guided by a neutral body. Now, neutrality was hardly there in Prasar Bharati. And as you know, I was hardly on talking terms with the then minister for about 2 years because of obvious reasons. And that was a Congress minister. A good person on the whole, but he had his interest and I had my duties. So we got. Now the question is, if Prasar Bharati itself was continuously sabotaged, continuously destroyed and systematically destroyed, and here I can give you one assurance, more than the politicians, it is the bureaucrats of the IAS that played a major role in demolishing Prasar Bharati. The Ministry of Information and Broadcasting ensured that Prasar Bharati that Prasar Bharati was a disadvantaged child, a polio child, or whatever we call it. So it's the while we have a share of grievances against the political hegemonists, the question is the bureaucracy has its own games to play, and usually they are not under so much strict watch. So the fact that Prasar Bharati was made to fail, it was made to fail. EMMC is being made to be utilized. Let's put it like that. They all have to go in for self-regulatory bodies. There's no other way out.
We are joined in by Professor Laid Ziglami from Algiers. Now he's asking, probably Ram could take this, why Indian media is not influential and impactful on world events?
I think this has been a long-standing weakness of the Indian press. Television, to some extent, tried to do that. I think very few newspapers have found it worthwhile to invest in original independent coverage with journalists stationed abroad. There have been some cases, but not enough. And when international affairs are covered, it is largely from a bilateral perspective. That can also be said about the US media, US press in particular. It's always that in comparison with many of the European, their counterparts. You get a much more rounded picture from, say, the UK, The Guardian, for example, or even some of the others. But so this has been a traditional weakness of the Indian press, and with pagination under pressure, fewer pages, and the newspapers at least find it hard to get space, and also the investment is a problem. But I think that is our friend has put his finger on quite a deep weakness of the Indian press. At any rate, I agree with that.
Yeah, okay. There's a question from P.S. Raghavan from Bangalore. Should we not also talk about media becoming the lapdog of powerful corporate interests? Obviously, powerful lapdog of powerful corporate interests. Now, Ram, would you like to answer that?
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. The business model also speaks to it. It is always a problem. So I would, I would say there is a myth of independence. It is only a relative thing made possible by certain political situations or socio-political situations, such as the one that I referred to following the emergency, when things seemed to open up quite a bit. But even that was very relative. So I think that there was a real, it is inbuilt pressure. But there have been to counteract this, one can say there have been some very good editors and journalists who have stood up. Some of them were sacked. I remember B.G. Verghese. Others stood up. And there was a more even relationship between the proprietors and editors. That is, tall editors, unfortunately largely male in those days, probably today also. But it was relative, and as long as the political situation permitted it, there was no intense pressure from the state. I think you could find a certain balance, which made for, I think, interesting journalism, productive journalism, investigations into corruption. But an investigation is not just because you believe it's a virtuous thing to do. Of course it is. It also gets you readers. It gets you ratings. People begin to talk about you. Other publications carry what you put out. Some of them not acknowledging it, but still your brand, if you like, your reputation is enhanced by this kind of independent journalism. So that also works in favor of interesting journalism, but always limited by corporate ownership, the concentration that is growing in some media markets. Pamela may be more competent to deal with that. But so I think even in the digital age, I think it's a myth that it's a level playing field. You've got to invest a lot if you do digital media and digital journalism. So I think, yes, that's an important part of it. And much has been written on this subject.
Yeah, I would like to put a subsidiary to that question, Pam. I mean, we have to stop talking about cross-media restrictions, totally. Cross-media restrictions, ownership. So has it gone totally out of fashion?
It's not a question of fashion, Suhas. I think basically the very powerful media houses ensured that it was defeated as an idea. I know that Trade put out many papers and so on. Trade tried very hard to try and peg down the power of monopolies, but failed. So let's face that. I mean, and manage this cross-media ownership was a huge success for mainstream newspapers and television channels. And we know that, for instance, the biggest newspaper in the country in terms of circulation is also the biggest media, has ownership on all kinds of media, from radio to television, across the board, and the digital space. So, I mean, you worry about these monopolies. And I think the other thing we have to worry about is the rise of the digital monopoly, like Facebook and Google and so on, because what they represent is the capacity to pass off as media and yet take protection under the garb that they are only intermediaries, and therefore they are not even liable to the rules and regulations that media have to, follow. And we saw that happening in this recent controversy on Facebook, about Facebook, and it's the way it allowed hate speech to proliferate. And that brings me to another concern, that if these organizations set the media narrative, then there is very little agency left for credible newspapers and television channels. Very little agency, because they are outstripped, outpaced, and cannot keep up. And that's what we are seeing today. The rise of fake news requires the credible media to have its presence registered in full strength. But what are we seeing? We are seeing widespread, job losses. About 1,000 people have lost their jobs across the country in the media. Would that not debilitate the media in very serious ways? Of course it would. And it would allow space for these pretenders to take over. And that is what's happening as well.
Okay, now this question I think is directed to Pam. It is talking about the role of civil society in mending matters.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
It says there's Yash Dhamija. Question boils down to audience and civil society. But we have the audience divided. So are you saying no scope for wise media to come back?
I'm saying that it's a very difficult job to actually revive the media in the way it should be revived. And it needs every support from the ordinary citizen, wherever they are located, whether they are located in rural India or in urban India. They should see that they have a stake in the media. You see, the thing is, in the days of the internet, you don't have silos anymore. Information travels across media. We saw the case of the Jharkhand, vigilante attack, when the rumor of child lifting was on WhatsApp. And you would think that in the deepest villages of Jharkhand, you would not get these messages, but these messages travel. And that is the situation we are living in today. And that is why we need credible media more than ever.
Yeah, now this question I think Ram could take up. There is Chandrasen Kumar. Now he gives his location as India. He doesn't say where he's speaking. He says, could anyone of the panelists please explain as to what extent Editors Guild is responsible for the present state of affairs in media houses? He says Editors Guild of India, how far is it responsible for what's happening?
I don't think you can blame the Editors Guild of India for, having said that, I'm not an active member. So I have no conflict of interest in saying this. I don't think you can blame them for what is happening. They could have, yes, we would like them to be more, stand up more when some media organizations are denied advertising deliberately on political grounds. They should raise it. So should INS and so on. But they have, from time to time, flagged these issues. To be fair to the Editors Guild and the various presidents, some of them my friends, who have done this. They have called attention to attacks and so on. So, but this has to be studied. But I don't think you can blame them for the trends that we are talking about and deploring and lamenting, if you like.
There's a question from Shweta. She is from Delhi, and she says self-regulation does not seem to be working with Indian television. So, what is the alternative? Is the civil society not questioning? Because the media is not questioning. I mean, it goes in a rhetorical.
May I give you my opinion before our expert Jawhar speaks to that? Ideally, I think a model like the Leveson report, self-regulatory mechanism underpinned by statute would be ideal. But I would not recommend it in the Indian case today, given the political environment and the kind of government we have, because that legislation itself would be, I think, oppressive. But ideally, the idea of the basic idea behind this recommendation in the Leveson report was that you must have a credible and independent self-regulating mechanism, and the only role of the statute or the statutory authority would be to certify that credibility. I think like BBC has, Ofcom, the regulator. Nobody complains about the authority that oversees this, but without interfering in the day-to-day affairs of the BBC. So this would have been, this is, I think, a good model, but even hasn't been put to work in the UK, because even there, the editors and others, I think, opposed it. But looks good, but cannot apply it in the Indian case today.
I think this is an interesting question. It's Hamid Ansari from New Delhi. The former.
Should we get Jawhar on this? Should you ask Jawhar to respond to this?
Yeah, I will. But we'll take this up with another point, which I think is to all of you. It's from Hamid Ansari, the former vice president. How do we detoxify the Indian mind and make it critical? Detoxification of the Indian mind. Anyway, so we'll.
What is the question? How do we refortify?
How we detoxify? How do we detoxify the Indian mind and make it critical? Okay, so can we ask Jawhar to answer the earlier question? The one
that's about self-regulation, the regulation of the TV channels. You see, in these 20 years that private television has come of age, various models have been tried out. I am dead against any governmental intervention. I know the genetic propulsion, the genetic urges that come within the political class and the bureaucratic class to hegemonize at the drop of a hat, to utilize this. And as Ram has put it, this is the worst time to think of any regulation that has even a fingerprint of government anywhere, because it will be twisted, gnarled, and put out of shape. Now, self-regulation is the only way out, but self-regulation has to come when there's a critical mass. There was an issue that was raised in the self-regulatory television body, and that the tantrum boy of Indian television, who says "Mere paas ye hai, maa hai," and others hai, he said, "I'm going to set up a new self-regulatory body. I'm going to set up a new council." Now, in such a situation, you cannot function. So there has to be some gravitation of certain forces, professional ethics that come in, and there's a high degree of professional ethics that I have encountered, not necessarily the pleasant way, but 4 decades in government means we've been at the receiving end, and you admire them for their professionalism. Now, there is a lot of professionalism still within the media that is not being able to come out. I strongly feel that a couple of indications of which way the wind is blowing would tip the scales. There's already a good indication that's come out on the last Mann Ki Baat. The number of people who have disliked it versus there were 10 times more or 8 times more than the number of people who liked it. So you require a lot of these indications, because it is these indications of the public mood that would encourage people to return to their bold or questioning selves. And even the owners would see the logic in going a bit towards vox populi. I mean, that's my way.
Yeah. No, actually, this, when this Mann Ki Baat was started, this was, I think, on the 14th of October 2014. I was invited by All India Radio to speak on it. And this program went, you were the CEO of Prasar Bharati. So it went live on the night program, just after the English news. And then I was asked, do you think it will make an impact? So I said the mandarins in Shastri Bhavan will start looking at radio now, and that's all. Otherwise, will it make a transformative impact on with the Prime Minister talking on radio? And it's virtually a soliloquy. There's no interaction. You see, somehow our Prime Minister avoids any interaction with either journalists or with people live. Anyway, that's another matter. So there's another question which probably quickly Jawhar can answer. This is from Devesh Sham from Nagarkoil. What exactly is the contraption called TRP in TV channels? How is it manufactured and manipulated?
No, I don't think TRP can be manipulated. We had another organization before this industry organization came in. We had one private organization that had limited number of meters and would be tilting scales in favor of whoever was more pleasant with them. But not anymore. The BARC has a certain amount of credibility, though it requires a lot of penetration. The more the penetration, the more the capture of data. BARC is an industry-run body, though there are whispers that the more powerful houses get to influence policy a little more. But then it's a far greater improvement over what I inherited. I would not like to. It was a Murdoch organization, as usual, that would decide that X has so much TRP, Y has so much TRP. So TRP is not manufactured. TRP comes from the number of people who have opened the television for that program and how long they have watched it. So this is an electronic media, and these can be guided. These can be captured if the intentions are clear. I have reason to believe that it's not controversial to the extent anymore.
A lot of questions on what is the remedy. So I think each one of you probably will, in the concluding remarks, would answer that. And now I think the time is coming to, we'll have to go into the concluding remarks round. And also, if each of you could take up the question raised by Ansari, how do we detoxify the Indian mind? That's a very larger question and make it critical. So just two of these which you could answer in your 2 minutes each on what are the remedies you suggest to this present imbroglio, and how do we detoxify the Indian mind? Yeah. So Pamela, can you come forward?
Is it detoxify or retoxify?
No. Detoxify.
He's talking continuous detoxification is going on, no?
Yeah, I appreciate that. But he's talking of detoxify.
Okay.
No, I think this need to detoxify the mind is very important, especially in these days of fake news. You see, the thing is, both the hate speech and fake news have their roots in the same sort of ecosphere, as it were, where you get the media that you choose, and you live in the bubble of that media. Now, how do we break out of that? That is a very large question, and I think it is large enough to include education and the importance of building critical engagement in the child. Because the thing is, if you don't question what you're seeing and what you're viewing, and you're accepting it just because someone you trust has sent it to you, or some organization that you are part of circulates it, it means that you're not exercising an independent mind. So detoxifying the mind must first start with the independence of the mind, and that is linked in some way to the independence of the media as well. So I haven't answered Mr. Hamid Ansari's question, of course, but I think it's an important issue, and I hope that more of us will think about it and try and look at ways by which ordinary civil society actors can come out and speak out in a critical way. We saw that a little bit when the anti-car protests took place, because it showed that even so-called less literate women were able to understand that the Constitution was a good thing and could protect them. And that was a learning, I think, that we can actually make use of as we go ahead.
Pam, there's a question which I think you are the best to answer. It's just come in now from Dilip Bob. He's a journalist. Huge damage is being done by IT cells of political parties. Fake news starts from there. How can they be held accountable to the public? The IT cells in political parties. I mean, basically, it's the BJP IT cell.
Yeah, I think all parties have IT cells, and they all try and do mischief, and I think we should recognize that. But BJP has been the most successful in leveraging its IT cell. And remember, the BJP is the party that has also used social media in the most systematic way. The present Prime Minister is the person who understands the social media in ways that no other politician in this country understands. So we are really looking at people who understand the media and know how to make use of it. And therefore, we will have to also understand the media in order to, sort of protect it.
Yeah. There's one last question before we go to the concluding session. It's just come in from Sudhir Bhutani, New Delhi, and is directed to Ram. Why are Indian journalists weak? Is it due to lack of education or money? Why are they timid and weak? I mean, he's taking a generalization.
I think it's too much of a generalization. I know older journalists as well as a number of young journalists who are not weak, who have not come there for money because they could go to other places. For example, the Asian College of Journalism, with which I'm associated, a number of young men and particularly women come in who are very bright, who could do other things. They come to journalism because they're attracted to it, almost in a romantic fashion. They love journalism, and I think the problem is once they go to a newsroom, they find the situation there completely out of sync with what they've learned in J school. So I don't agree with this. Of course, I think a lot of them come under pressure from the top and also from the existential situation. One other thought, Suhas, that occurs to me from what Jawhar said, that if a certain political organization or a strong leader has mass backing, that itself, I think, overawes many intellectuals and also journalists and so on. It's not just state power, state repression, corporate power, dependence, and so on. It's also the idea that I'm contending against this, huge mass which puts pressure, and that also is transmitted by social media, particularly Twitter, which gives you the trolls, gives you the idea that they have overwhelming force. I have a slight take on the use of the social media by a slight difference rather by the BJP and the Prime Minister and so on. I think some of it is very crude, and eventually I think people can see through that. So when we speak about what needs to be done, I'll say something about that. I think you can puncture that because it's so crude and so untrue that adopting certain methods like what alt news is doing by way of fact checking, I think you can make a real difference.
So can we come to the concluding remarks by Jawhar? If you could pick up that, what is the remedy now?
You see, Pamela has given a hint. The remedy lies in the sort of media you want. Media is almost like a boat that is floating on the water of the people. It can't rise. It's not a rocket that can rise above the level of the people. Now, that is not to blame the entire distress on the people, because that would be insulting the intelligence of most people. There's a large amount of manipulation that is going on, and manipulation that is getting unchecked. And since the only check we can look forward in these distressing times is the judiciary, a large part of which has suddenly woken up to its responsibilities. I mean, there have been good judgments in the recent past or even before. But then there's a reassertion that is very clear in the last couple of months, despite the fact that objective and subjective conditions in the Supreme Court have not changed. So despite that, there's a reassertion of judicial thought. Now, if the judiciary intervenes and says, like it has been saying in this, in the Delhi High Court and the Bombay High Court have been saying in the case of Sudarshan, in the case of Tabligis, in the case of this Riya Chakrabarti, if they start raising these questions, it's child's play to expose. It's child's play to expose fake news. I can assure you, the way alt news rips apart all types of fake news, and 90% of them or 85% of them are attributed only to one party. One party that starts with a little bit of truth and then goes on exploding. Now, unfortunately, we have to take that syndrome into account as the present. They are the conditions as they exist, and there's no point in ranting against it. We need to be conscious of the bias in the system at present. I have a feeling that judiciary needs to be tapped more and more. What can happen? At the worst, they can reject you, as they did in the first cases of migrant labor, yet threw you out and made all sorts of comments. Insensitive comments were made. But then it was the same judiciary that woke up and the same Supreme Court that started issuing more just orders. So we need to have faith. We need the benches differ. We need to have faith, because legislation is no now. No legislation, please. Because whatever legislation exists is being twisted. So the judiciary remains hope, and the hue and cry factor. I have noticed that the hue and cry factor of civil society, the conscious opposition of civil society, does matter. It's not worked so far in the Koregaon case, in the Bhima Koregaon case. It's not worked so far, but I'm sure it will. If it's worked in Tablighi, it's worked, it'll come up. We need to be patient on that and make it very clear that our ideals are non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. And we cannot be pushed beyond the point, come what may. This is allowed, and if this message reaches the ruling class, of which I have been an active part for the better part of my life, if it reaches them, it has its own effect. I can assure you it has its own effect. So the remedy lies in a large amount of encouragement from the people, articulation of protest, which I call the hue and cry factor, judicial intervention and ripping apart, when possible, fake news to the extent possible, ripping apart and also campaigning that this is all fake and perhaps taking them to prosecution. That's the only way I see now.
Yeah. Ram, can your concluding remarks?
I think I largely adopt that position. I think that's a very, it's not just to give ourselves hope, but I think it reflects reality. I think there are various chinks in their armor. We must remember that the media environment is part of a larger socio-political environment, and that's where patience is required for that to change. But meanwhile, professionalism will help. Ripping apart disinformation, toxic disinformation will help. Getting the help of people with a lot of experience in government, many of including former judges of the Supreme Court and High Court, people like A.P. Shah, Madan Lokur, various others, Gopal Gowda, various others who are speaking out, going out of their way to speak out on these issues. I think that's very valuable. And consolidate the strengths of those who are holding out and provide better support to the digital-only players like The Wire or Scroll and Quint and the Caravan magazine. I think it does excellent work, but support these organizations even more than the help they are getting today. I think with all these things are done, a party which got a majority with only 37% of the vote in 2019 and 31% in 2014, I think it can be checked. And there are also states. That's how NDTV survives. They get ads from state governments. And that's, I think, been quite successful. So I think all these ways and means can be adopted. So India is far too big, far too diverse, far too spirited a country to be kept down permanently. I lived through the emergency. We thought, a lot of people thought that, we will never get back to those institutions we are familiar with, the institutions of liberal democracy. But today, liberal democracy is being used to serve another purpose by authoritarian forces, authoritarian movements, authoritarian camps. They don't have to do away with as military coups do. But I think there are also many weaknesses in that strategy and I fully agree on the judiciary. There have been some excellent judgments recently. One is the Aurangabad bench, which already referred to, of the High Court of Bombay. Another one is the Allahabad bench of the UP High Court, which I think took a very good position recently. And there have been other judgments. But if we name these judges and courts, perhaps they will come under pressure from social media. So we better remain smart and, keep quiet about who's doing great work and who's not, except generally recognizing this phenomenon. I have faith in our judiciary. And finally, I just want to give one example. The whole Prashant Bhushan affair, although the judgment was, I think, a terrible judgment that came out at the end, although the fine was only 1 rupee. I must make sure Prashant pays that fine at least tomorrow. I don't think he's paid it yet. You don't want him to be debarred and so on. He has to be there to take up other good causes. But paradoxically, what has happened is it's led to an intense examination in the media of the record of a retired judge, how the Supreme Court is doing, and other people are saying much stronger things than Prashant was convicted for and fined for. That the questions are also raised in the other matter relating to corruption in the judiciary. So I think these are good things that are happening, and I fully agree with the sort of assessment that Jawhar provided.
Okay. So now we have to conclude the session, and thank you all very much. But one thing is there that we all seem to be, that includes me, diehard optimists, So we are we're calling out for patience. We are calling out for a intense role of the civil society. We are calling out for the judiciary to stand up more without naming any such, because as Ram says, there can be retribution. So we are calling out to the people of India to stand up, and as we passed out, we stepped out of the emergency, we'll probably step out of this phase also, because nobody rules eternally. And they will be, not the Achhe Din which somebody is talking of, but Achhe Din of what we are talking of. And probably, the liberal democracy will return to India sooner than later. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining.